The last call. For 9 days, Joseph Franklin had tried everything else, and that is the part of this story that matters most, even though nobody sitting in that conference room on the 34th floor knew it yet. When Marcus Hale looked up from his desk and saw the old man standing in the doorway, jacket torn at the sleeve, canvas satchel hanging from one shoulder, he felt the particular pleasure of a man who believes he already knows the ending. He didn't know about the 9 days. He didn't know what those 9 days had actually cost, or what they had revealed, or what Joseph had quietly arranged on the 10th night while sitting alone in a church basement on Lammer Street with a single lamp burning and a phone pressed to his ear. He didn't know any of it, and that ignorance, comfortable and complete as it was, would become the most expensive thing the Marcus Hale had ever owned. 3 weeks before that Thursday morning, Joseph had written a letter. He typed it carefully at the public library on Lamma Street, 2 full pages, using a keyboard that stuck on the letter E and a monitor with a crack running diagonally across the upper right corner. The letter was respectful and specific. It outlined the situation at the building on Lammer Street, named The Families, described their circumstances without embellishment, and asked for a meeting. He read it over 3 times before printing it. He folded it into a clean envelope he had brought from home and addressed it by hand to the Hale Capital corporate office downtown. Then he walked it to the post office himself and paid for certified mail because he wanted a record of the attempt. He wanted to be able to say when the time came that he had tried. The letter was never answered, not a form response, not a phone message, not even an automated acknowledgement. It simply disappeared into the architecture of an organization designed, whether intentionally or not, to make certain kinds of requests disappear. So he called. 4 times over the following week, Joseph dialed the development office number listed on the Hale Capital website. Each call was taken by a different assistant. Each assistant was polite. Each one promised that someone would follow up, and each one's follow-up never arrived. He kept notes. He wrote down the date, the time, the name of the person he had spoken with, and the exact language they had used. He didn't know why he was keeping those notes yet. He kept them because keeping records was what you did when you had no other power, because a careful accounting of attempts is its own kind of testimony. After the 4th call, he attended a city council session and sat in the public gallery for 4 hours on a wooden bench that was not designed for extended occupation by a man whose body had absorbed the particular weariness of a hard life. He waited for the agenda item related to the Lammer Street acquisition and the accelerated demolition timeline. He waited through 3 budget discussions, a rezoning appeal for a downtown hotel, and a lengthy procedural argument about a committee appointment. The Lammer Street item never came because it had been quietly tabled at the request of a legal team that Joseph did not have the resources to compete with. And he found this out not from any official communication, but from a woman who worked in the gallery's administrative office and told him gently, off the record, that sometimes items got moved and there wasn't always a public announcement. He thanked her. He walked home. He made soup from what he had in the cabinet and sat at the small table in his room and thought for a long time without moving. The next morning, he went to the legal aid office on 5th Street, where a young attorney with kind eyes and an overwhelming caseload told him that without an injunction, which could take weeks they didn't have, there was nothing legally actionable in the traditional sense. The demolition permit was clean. The acquisition was clean. The timeline had been executed correctly within the existing regulatory framework, by meaning that the families on Lammer Street had no formal legal standing because they had no leases a court would recognize and no documentation that any court would consider binding. 11 days remained on the demolition clock. The attorney looked genuinely sorry. Joseph told her she had been helpful and that he appreciated her time, and he meant both things. 14 families lived in that building, not officially, not on paper, not in any ledger that the city or a court or a developer would acknowledge, but humanly. They lived there the way people live in places when they have no other place to live, which is to say fully, completely, with the entire weight of their lives pressed into those rooms. Gloria was 58 years old and had been sober for 3 years through a sustained act of will that anyone who has never struggled with addiction will permanently underestimate. She was 4 months from her Section 8 eligibility date. 4 months. The kind of distance that looks small on a calendar and enormous from where she was standing. Terrence was 29 and working a split shift across 2 jobs, leaving before his daughters woke and returning after they were asleep more nights than he wanted to count. His two girls slept on a mattress in the corner of the room, and he had arranged their stuffed animals along the wall, with the deliberateness of a man who understood that dignity can be constructed from almost nothing if you are willing to pay attention to the details. He was clawing towards something better, slowly, genuinely, with no safety net beneath him except his own determination and the roof above his children's heads. Edmund and Celeste were both in their 70s and had come from Haiti and spoke limited English, and were not confused or helpless, but were navigating a system that had not been designed to accommodate them. Their son in Miami was actively arranging transport. He needed 6 more weeks. He had sent money when he could. He called every Sunday. He was trying. Joseph knew all of their names. He knew Edmund's hands, which had been a carpenter's hands, and still moved with a craftsman's precision, even when he was doing nothing in particular. He knew the specific sound of Celeste's laugh, which was low and private and arrived unexpectedly, like weather. He knew about Gloria's plant on the windowsill, which she watered every morning as the first act of the day before anything else, as though tending something living was the frame around which the rest of the day was built. He knew which nights Terence came home, looking like the weight of it might finally win, and which nights he came home looking like it hadn't. He knew all of this because Joseph Franklin did not advocate for people from a distance. He lived among them. That was not a strategy or a philosophy or a program. It was simply how he had come to understand that the work had to be done, after the years of loss had burned away everything that wasn't load-bearing and left him with a clarity that comfort had previously made impossible to access. He had once worn suits. 22 years ago, he ran a small community development organization with a real office and a staff and a donor base and a mission statement that he had believed in and worked toward with genuine commitment. He had a house on Clement Avenue with a front porch he intended to fix when he had time. He had a wife named Ruth who taught 4th grade and laughed at her own jokes before the punchline and made soup from scratch and had a quality of attention that made whoever she was speaking to feel as though nothing else in the world was currently more important. He had a son named David, who was 16 and interested in marine biology and had recently started listening to jazz, which Joseph found inexplicable and quietly wonderful. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 blocks from school, a drunk driver ran a red light. David survived. The recovery consumed everything. The surgeries alone would have been enough. The rehabilitation extended beyond them. The years of medical complexity that followed required a sustained engagement with an insurance system designed to exhaust people at their most exhausted, to deny and delay and appeal until the claimant either gave up or ran out of the capacity to continue fighting. Joseph fought, he and Ruth both fought, together, in shifts, and the fighting took the savings, and then the house, and then the organization, because there was no longer enough of him left over to run it. Ruth's heart gave out 8 years ago. Heart failure, the death certificate said, which was accurate as far as it went. Joseph had another way of understanding it, which was that Ruth had carried more than one person is built to carry for more years than love alone can sustain. And eventually the weight found its limit. He did not blame the weight. He did not blame himself, though it took years to arrive at that. He did not experience the losses as punishment or as failure. He experienced them as instruction, eventually, after the grief had moved through every room of him and settled. He did not return to the life he had lived before, and this was not because he couldn't. It was because he had sat in a church basement on Lammer Street the 3rd winter after the house was gone, eating donated soup on a metal folding chair, surrounded by people who had also lost things. And he had felt something he had spent 20 years professionally attempting to build, and had never once actually experienced from the inside. Real community. Not community as a concept or a goal or a measurable outcome, but the specific warmth that exists between people who have nothing to perform for each other, who have already arrived at the place beyond pretense, where the question of status has been answered so finely that it no longer requires asking. He never left that proximity. He became, over years of unhurried and unglamorous presence, the connective tissue. The person who knew where the meals were, which shelters had space on which nights, how to navigate the county intake office without surrendering your dignity at the door, which social workers had genuine power, and which ones were managing their caseloads from behind a wall of procedure. He became the person that Lammer Street called when it needed someone who would stay. Which is why on a Thursday morning, with 11 days remaining and every institutional door closed, 14 families looked at him across a church basement and asked what was left to try. He told them he was going in person, He told them he would go to Marcus Hale directly and look him in the eye and ask him as one human being to another to give them 60 days. He told them something else as well, something he kept quiet, something he had shared with exactly one other person during a phone call the previous night. He said there was one more option if this one didn't work, but he wanted to try the right way first. He wanted to give Marcus Hale the chance to be decent before anything was forced. Because if he forced it, the outcome might be achieved, but the man would remain unchanged. And something in that man needed to change. That mattered too. The old friend on the other end of the phone had listened and said, "That sounds like you. It's Joe. Try it your way. If he won't hear you, call me back and put me on." The elevator opened on the 34th floor. The receptionist looked up, then looked again. The man who stepped out was somewhere between 65 and 75, though the years had left their marks with a heavy hand. His jacket was brown and badly torn at the sleeve. His shirt hung open at the collar with the soft exhaustion of fabric that has been washed many times and knows it. His pants were worn through at the knee. The canvas satchel over his shoulder was thin enough to suggest it had carried a great deal for a long time. In his right hand, deliberate and incongruous against everything else about him, a modern smartphone, clean and charged. He gave his name. The receptionist made the call. From behind the conference room doors came laughter, and then the words, "Let's send him up. I want to see this." Marcus Hale was somewhere between 45 and 55, silver at the temples, dressed in a crisp light blue suit with a dark tie and the specific ease of a man who has never seriously questioned whether he belongs in a room. Behind him, through floor-to-ceiling glass, the city spread like a painting he had commissioned. 3 colleagues were arranged at the far end of the table, 2 men in their 30s with dark suits and smiles calibrated to match the room's tone. A woman in her late 30s or 40s with pearl earrings and an expression set to mirror whatever Marcus was doing. Joseph told him everything. Not emotionally, clearly. He went through the building, the 11 days, the 14 families, their names, their specific situations, Gloria's sobriety, and her Section 8 timeline. Terrence's daughters and his 2 jobs, and the mattress in the corner, arranged with such careful attention. Edmund and Celeste, and the son in Miami, who needed 6 more weeks. He told him about the letter that was never answered and the 4 phone calls, and the city council session, and the legal aid office and what the young attorney had said. He told him he was not there to threaten or litigate or generate noise. He was there to ask, man to man, face to face, for 60 days. Marcus looked at him for a moment with something almost resembling consideration. Then it passed. The word "sir" arrived already wrapped in its conclusion. The permits were filed. The timeline was set. The people Joseph was describing were not legally tenants. There was nothing he could do. He paused and then, with the particular cruelty of a man who has mistaken it for wit, he added that, with respect, there was also nothing Joseph could do. His colleagues adjusted their smiles. The room settled into its own unkindness with the comfort of a thing that has happened there before. Joseph reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. "Then you won't mind," he said quietly, "if I make a call." The laugh that came out of Marcus Hale was the kind that fills a room entirely, that moves the shoulders and tilts the head back and claims all the available air. He gestured at the window, at the skyline, at the enormous and different machinery of the city beyond the glass. "Call whoever you want." Joseph pressed dial. It connected on the second ring. "Joe, I've been waiting. Tell me how it went." The laughter stopped. Not slowly, all not winding down through diminishing returns. The way a power cut stops a room. Instant, total, everything suddenly reconfigured. Because that voice. Marcus Hale knew that voice from Senate chambers and press conferences and televised addresses, and from a private fundraising dinner 3 years ago, for which he had paid $12,000 to be in the same room as it. The entire country knew that voice. It belonged to a man who had grown up 3 blocks from Lammer Street, whose mother had sat in the same church basement where Joseph organized, who had delivered the eulogy at Ruth Franklin's funeral and wept without any apparent concern for how it looked, because Ruth had fed him soup when he had nothing, and believed in him before he had given anyone a reason to. Joseph said into the phone, "About how we expected. I'd like you to speak with Mr. Hale, if you're willing." A pause then. Put him on. Joseph extended the phone across the table. His arm did not tremble. His face had not changed once. Not when Marcus laughed, not now, not at any point since he had stepped off that elevator. Marcus took the phone. Nobody at the far end of the table spoke. The two men looked at the glass. The woman looked at her hands. Marcus went very still. Then he nodded. Then he pressed his free hand over his mouth, the involuntary gesture of a man receiving something he has no prepared place to put. 4 minutes passed. Marcus said almost nothing. Yes, I understand. He pressed his hand harder against his mouth. Yes. He stood and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room and said nothing for a long time. When he set the phone on the table, his face had genuinely changed, not shattered. Opened, which is different, and in some ways harder. He looked at Joseph. You knocked on every door first. His voice had lost the architecture it came in with. The letter, the calls, the counsel, the legal office. He stopped. You tried every decent way before you came here. Yes, Joseph said. I wanted to give you the chance to do it because it was right, not because you had to. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, the layers were gone. Every layer that comfort builds over a person, the ones that get added so gradually you stop noticing they're there, gone. I looked at you and I saw nothing. A punchline. He stopped. I've been doing that my whole career, and somewhere along the way, I genuinely stopped registering that I was doing it. I'm sorry. Not as a formality, as something that matters. I need you to know that. Joseph looked at him steadily. Hold on to that, he said. Don't let comfort make you forget it. Marcus straightened. He said 60 days. Real support, not just time. Funding, contacts, placement resources, coordination with the county programs he had access to and had never thought to use this way. He said something else then, quietly, with his eyes on the table. I need you to tell me what this actually looks like, because you know these people and I genuinely don't. For the first time since he had stepped off that elevator, something softened around Joseph's eyes. I know what it looks like, he said. I'll show you. He walked back through the lobby, through the glass doors and out onto the sidewalk, where the city moved around him exactly as it always had, without slowing, without ceremony, indifferent to any particular outcome. He stood for a moment in the cold air and thought about Gloria and her plant on the windowsill, about Terrence's daughters on the mattress, about Edmund's carpenter's hands, about Celeste's laugh. The building on Lammer Street would still be standing tonight, and for 60 more days at a minimum, and with whatever those 60 days could be made to accomplish when someone with real resources was finally pointed in the right direction. He thought about the phone call, not the one in that conference room, the one the night before, in the basement, with the lamp burning. He thought about what his old friend had said, and what else had been said after that, the other part of the conversation, the quieter part, the part that had nothing to do with 60 days or 14 families or a demolition permit, and everything to do with what Joseph Franklin was going to be asked to consider next. The old friend had said, Joe, I've been thinking, there's a position, advisory, structural, not charity, not a title. Real authority to change how the city interfaces with communities like Lammer Street at the policy level. Real access, the kind that doesn't go away when a single phone call ends. I want you to think about it. Joseph had said he would think about it. He had meant he would think about it carefully, fully, with the same deliberate attention he brought to everything else. The same attention that had kept him clear-eyed through 22 years of loss and presence and work that most people would have walked away from long before now. He had won 60 days. He had opened something in a man on the 34th floor that might, if tended correctly, become something with lasting form. He had done it the way he always did things, which was the right way first, and only then with whatever was necessary. He put his phone in his pocket and began walking back toward Lammer Street. Somewhere behind him, on the 34th floor, Marcus Hale was still sitting at the table. His colleagues had gone. He was looking at his phone, at a contact that had been saved there for 3 years since the fundraising dinner, a contact he had never once called. And he was beginning to understand something about the nature of the meeting that had just occurred, something that the warmth of the moment had made easy to miss. Joseph Franklin had not come to that office because it was his last option. He had come because it was his preferred one. The other call had already been made. The conversation about the advisory position had already happened. The access had already been offered and was already, in all but formal terms, accepted. The 60 days were not the outcome. They were the demonstration. Marcus Hale looked out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not entirely sure who had been in whose office. Joseph turned the corner onto Lammer Street. He had people waiting. He had always had people waiting. And the difference now was that the waiting was almost over, and what came next would be built on ground that had finally shifted. He walked without hurrying. He had learned a long time ago that certain things cannot be rushed, and that the appearance of unhurry is its own form of authority, the kind that doesn't require a window view, or a title, or a light blue suit to communicate itself. He had one more call to return before he reached the building. He did not reach for his phone yet.